All right, y'all. So here we go. Round two of the review session. We're going to be covering topics 2.2 to 2.3. So far, we've only done three topics at the counting the end of today. That's because 2.1, 2.2, and 2.3 are a little bit more thorough because it's like foundational stuff. Okay. Also, don't forget that the next set of summaries are going to be due on Monday. I'll explain that in person. But here we go. All right, so first, we're going to talk about the legislative process and how bills are introduced and sometimes what they add to them, okay? So, Congress, when they want a member of Congress to introduce a law, they introduce it and that makes them the sponsor of the bill. When bills originate in the House, they start with HR for House of Representatives. When bills start in the Senate, they start with S for Senate, okay? As a reminder, Congress, not the president, creates laws. And even though tons of bills hit Congress, about 90% of them die early. Most of them never become a law. Most of them stay bills or they die. Okay. Also, we got riders. Those are the addition of non-germane amendments to benefit a member's agenda. Those can only be done in the Senate, but that's basically when like non-related things get added to a bill. For example, say Congress is passing like a military bill, they would then attach something about like funding for national parks or funding for agriculture, and that's known as a rider because it's basically like taking a free ride on the bill that's unrelated to what the bill's about. Okay. We also got omnibus bills, also known as Christmas tree bills. Those are like everything all in one bills where tons of riders get attached, and it's just like a monster bill that does a bunch of different things. It's called a Christmas tree bill because the main bill is the tree, and the riders are like the ornaments of the tree. Okay. Sometimes it's the only way that Congress can actually pass a budget on time. As you guys know, Congress can be a little dysfunctional. We saw that recently with the government shutdown. Next is pork belly spending. This is basically like when like representatives secure money for their own voters, which makes re-election for them easier. These can be controversial, because like yeah, the supporters would be happy with it because it helps communities, right? Like they get bridges or they get roads or they get local programs because of it. But critics say that it wastes federal money and rewards political connections. However, I would argue that like Congress is built on deal making, and pork belly spending is always going to be part of the deal to get certain bills passed. Okay. An example of this would be like they once passed funding for a teapot museum in North Carolina hidden inside a transportation bill. Okay, so it's like a last minute rider added on by a legislator where federal funds only benefit their district. All right, now the legislative process, assigning and voting on bills. The way that bills get introduced is they get assigned to a committee. So the House Rules Committee is who directs the bills to the right place. And in the Senate Majority Leader sends the bill to the right place. And this is important because the committee that it gets sent to basically determines the fate of the bill. A friendly committee will give it a chance and they'll help push it through. But a hostile committee that doesn't even want to consider that bill, they can just kill it right away. If it gets to the committee and they actually want to help push it through, there's three stages. One is hearings. Okay. With the hearings, they gather expert witnesses, they hear from special interest groups, from agency officials if it's relevant, and citizens affected by the issue. An example of this would be like a gun control bill. They're going to include testimony from the NRA, the National Rifle Association, from police chiefs, from gun violence victims, and maybe even researchers. That's the hearing stage. Next is the markup stage. This is where Congress members will literally mark up the bill, like edit it, rewrite it, add amendments. The markup process can be intense, it can be political. Deals get made, language gets softened or toughened from the bill, and the bill might come out looking very different than it did when it first came in. And third is the report out phase. When the committee votes yes, that means they report it out and it goes to the House or Senate floor for debate and a vote. But if they say no, it stays in the committee. Also, a term I want you guys to be familiar with is pigeonholing. If a committee chair wants a bill to die, they simply will do nothing with it. No hearings, no markup, no vote, and the bill over time will eventually disappear. We've seen this happen a lot over time with gun control and immigration reform, and it's definitely a thing that happens. When they don't want to pass it, they just do what's called pigeonholing the bill. Now, when it comes to voting on bills, legislators do gather information from constituents, from polls, from staff members. A lot of the time, like the congressional offices will literally count the emails and be like, all right, this many people want us to support, this many people want us to say no. But they'll also hear from like interest groups and party leadership. In order to pass a bill, it just needs a simple majority. So in the House, that's 218 out of 435. In the Senate, that's 51 out of 100, unless there's a filibuster, and then it would take 60 out of 100 to end the filibuster. Also, be familiar with log rolling. This is basically like when House members or Senate members are like, you vote for my bill and I'll vote for yours. It's like an exchange. This is important to know because Congress runs on relationships and deal making. Log rolling is how controversial or regional bills, meaning like bills that are only in a certain area, will survive. So, like, let me give you an example of log rolling. Say a rural senator supports an urban transportation bill, and in exchange, an urban senator supports funding for a rural agricultural like subsidies. Both get what they want, and alone, it's likely that neither of them would pass. All right, next section here is the budgeting process. The budgeting process happens through the Office of Management and Budget. This is part of the executive branch and it's headed by a director. They prepare the president's annual budget proposal. They're like the government's accountants, and they include recommendations for how much money each agency should get. Keep in mind, Congress does not have to follow the president's recommendations. They can, but they don't have to. Okay. There's also reconciliation. So Congress can reconcile the budget every year, meaning make changes to it. They can make changes to revenue or spending. They set the priorities and the appropriate money to agencies based on preference or need or availability. Okay. This matters because ultimately, like Congress has control of the purse. Even if a president requests funds, Congress can increase, decrease, or even block them if they want to. An example of this would be in 2017 when Congress used reconciliation to pass the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Okay. As far as sources of revenue, this is where the government gets their money from. Most of it is from individual income taxes. It's the largest source of federal revenue. It's about 50% of all of the government's revenue. And it's a progressive system, meaning the more money you make, the more you pay in taxes. They also make money off of corporate taxes. So, like taxes on company profits. They make money off of social insurance taxes like Social Security, Medicaid, and unemployment. They also make money off of tariffs, a little bit more now, of course, under Trump because of how he went with tariffs. But tariffs, of course, are taxes on imported goods. And then there's also excise taxes. Those are like taxes on specific goods like cigarettes, alcohol, or gasoline. Other sources of revenue for the government would be like estate taxes or like customs duties and fees or interest earned on investments that the government made. Okay. Also, I want to throw this in there. This is a hint. Keep in mind that the government shutdowns happen because two parties cannot come to an agreement. And when those two parties do not come to an agreement, a budget does not get passed. Again, keep that in mind. Government shutdowns happen when they cannot pass a budget because of party differences. All right, now let's talk about mandatory versus discretionary spending. Give me a second. I'm going to get some water real quick. Okay, mandatory versus discretionary spending. Mandatory spending is pretty self-explanatory. It's spending required by law for programs that automatically provide benefits to people who meet eligibility rules. There's no annual approval needed by Congress. It happens automatically. So Congress doesn't get a say. They have to fund it. These programs include Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, and unemployment benefits. There's also discretionary spending. Oh, by the way, a deficit. Deficit means like when the needed amount exceeds the expected revenue, like debt. Okay. When you're in a deficit, you're adding to more to your debt. And then as far as discretionary spending goes, that's money Congress decides annually through the appropriations process for programs not required by law. This would be like defense, military salaries, weapons, human resources like education, health programs, physical resources like transportation, interest on debt, and discretionary spending is the flexible part of the budget. Politicians have to debate how much money goes into defense versus these social programs. And that's all from taxpayer dollars. Okay. Examples of discretionary spending, more examples would be like highways, NASA, or like disaster relief. Okay. So mandatory versus discretionary spending. All right. Now, influences on Congress. Partisanship and polarization. I will say partisanship means a lack of political cooperation between opposing parties. We see that a lot today. Democrats and Republicans are like they tend to not work together. Okay. We used to see it more often. Like between the 50s and the 70s, we saw a lot more bipartisanship. Like people were actually siding with the other party on certain issues and they would try their best to work together. But now we don't really see that. Like, for example, Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act in 2010, was passed almost entirely along Democratic lines. Like, Republicans pretty much completely opposed it. And these debt ceiling debates, like when the government ends up shutting down, they often break down along party lines. Shows you how like far apart the parties are and how unwilling they are to compromise nowadays. There's also three different voting models. So again, this center box right here is three different ways that these representatives can vote. So it's like three different philosophies. First is the delegate one. It's basically reflecting the will of the constituent. So like you vote exactly how your constituent wants. So if you survey the people that you represent and they want like more green energy, even if the senator or the House of Representative person disagrees themselves, they'll still vote for it if the people they represent want it. That's the delegate model. The trustee model is the opposite. That's when representatives vote based on their own judgment rather than what's best for the country. Right? So like say a senator will support a defense bill like a military bill, even though the majority of their state opposes it, believing that it's necessary, right, for like national security. And third is the political model. This is a blend of delegate and trustee, basically like voting with the people they represent on visible local issues, but using their judgment on more complex and technical bills like the federal budget. Third is redistricting. This is like the redrawing of congressional district based on population. State legislators draw these districts, and usually they try to benefit the majority party. We see this in gerrymandering. I believe I'm going to talk about that on Monday, so I'm not going to dive into it because it's quite a bit as well. All right, now, Baker versus Carr. So, what you need to know about Baker versus Carr, you do need to know this for the AP test. It's one of the core 15 court cases. Before Baker versus Carr, they had districts that like they would not change the borders. So like even though these districts were created with the same amount of people when they were established, like decades passed and city areas exploded in population, rural areas went down in population, and the district stayed the same. Well, this rubbed Charles Baker the wrong way. And he was like, that doesn't make sense because in a district of 2 million people, my vote is 1 in 2 million. Whereas in a district in a rural area with only 10,000 people, their vote is 1 in 10,000. So their vote has way more weight, has way more power than mine, where mine is 1 in 2,000. So he took it to the Supreme Court and he was like, this violates the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause because my vote is diluted. And he had a good case. The Supreme Court ended up taking it. People didn't want the Supreme Court to take the case because they thought that it was a political question. But the Supreme Court was like, no, the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause is for the courts to decide. So they were like, we have to act when citizens claim that their voting rights are being harmed. And of course, they sided with Charles Baker. And now we have the one vote, one person, one vote concept. Okay, that's what you should get out of Baker versus Carr. One person, one vote, and all the votes should have the same weight. States now had to redraw their districts to be of equal population. That way, a representative in the House has the same amount of people, regardless of where they are in the country. Okay. Also, this opened the door for future redistricting cases because once the Supreme Court takes one, you guys already know there's precedent, and they can start taking other similar cases as well. All right, so that ends day 2 of review. I need 3 summaries for the notes that you have in front of you regarding this topic. It may be 4 pages, but I'm pretty sure it's 3. I haven't printed them yet. But yeah, I'll see you soon.